And that's not taxable. That's labor. And you can have income from all kinds of other sources that are legitimate income, and then you just don't list your labor. Now your employer is going to send your W-2 forms in, and the IRS is going to say, well, that's income. Well, 99 times out of 100, wages, tips, salaries, and commissions are income because the people volunteer to make it income. They take their salaries and their tips and everything and they deposit it in the banks. Or they may not put that in the bank, but they put the rest of their salaries in the bank and then put themselves under the income tax that way. You see? And then they're not declaring all of their income. So the IRS isn't as far off base and out to lunch as you think. They themselves, that is, the agents of the government, are ignorant as to common law rights because there aren't very many common law citizens left in the country. But on the other hand, they're not wrong. It's those of us who are acting in a corporate capacity and think we have rights. And then we fill out these Fifth Amendment returns. Now, if there is a return and you do have income and you are going to fill the income tax return out, and there are some incriminating statements on there like, oh, marijuana receipts and gambling receipts, you know, that's income all right, but you don't want to talk about marijuana and gambling, do you? So that you would fill out Fifth Amendment, and that's what the court is talking about. And in the Garner case and Sullivan case, those were, at least the Garner case was a fellow who was a gambler, and he didn't have to fill in those blanks down there. And when you get into the official IRS tax audit guide, that's your yellow book here, you're going to see dozens of cases in the footnotes down here. You need to read a lot of these cases. I can't do it, of course, on TV here, but there's just all kinds of nifty statements in here and all kinds of comments and underlinings in here, and there's all kinds, Boyd versus U.S., U.S. versus Lawn, Linen Service Council. I mean, there's just a number of cases in here that the IRS has laid out for you, and you'll find out just exactly what the Supreme Court says. Just follow those cases and you can't go wrong. And they'll tell you what income is and what income isn't, and I think the Boyd case is in there, and I don't know if Eisner's in here or not, but we're going to send you Eisner, and there's just a number of cases and tell you exactly what the Supreme Court has said. And then when you go into these tax audits, you go in there with some knowledge and say, well, let me explain to you what my position is. And your good faith challenge, in other words, your issue is always, sir, I am not a tax protester, I'm not a tax resistor, I believe in taxes, I pay taxes. If I owe you any taxes, I'm going to pay them before I leave this building today. But I don't think I owe you any tax. Now let's sit down and discuss this subject. Well, you've got W-2 forms. Hold it. W-2 form is not evidence of taxable income. It's evidence of compensation. That may be taxable income or it may not be. And I'm contending that it isn't. Now let's talk about it. Let's talk about labor. Let's talk about compensation, tips, commissions, and etc. That's the way that you go into an IRS hearing and have fun while you're there. Number 11, don't sign any 1040 form unless it's signed under threat, duress, and coercion. And that's why you should always wait until you get a court order to compel you to fill out the tax form. You know, I'm not a taxpayer. I don't have any income. I'm not a person who's required to do it. So I want the court to order me to do this against my will and over my objection and then get it on the record. Now, I won't sign up as an illegal alien unless I get a court order that compels me to go down to the post office and fill out the form as a resident alien. Oh, okay, I'll go down and fill out the form because you're threatening me. And I'd go down and fill out the form. George Gordon, where were you born? Fortuna, California. And I'd fill the whole form out. And when I got through, I signed under threat, duress, and coercion by court order. George Gordon. Well, here you are. Here's my confession. Here's the confession that was threatened and forced out of me under the Miranda Doctrine. See how easy that is? No fuss and no muss. Number 12. Do not surrender any records to the government. Well, a free man doesn't keep records, and whatever records he has are not protected under the Fifth Amendment. They're protected under the Fourth Amendment. So always put up your Fourth Amendment issue to protect your privacy. But if you're a corporation or a juristic person in some way, remember Hale versus Hinkle does not protect you. You cannot resist the suit of the state if you're a juristic person. Number 13, do not keep records. Here's all the records that I keep right here. I'll show them to you. Right there. And just as soon as I don't need them anymore, gee, there's a record. Good thing I'm showing this. Okay. Now let me see. Well, I want to keep this one. This is an account receivable. Somebody owes me something. Yeah, I'm going to keep that one. Oh, wait a minute. This is an account payable. I don't need accounts payable because if I owe somebody something, he won't forget. He'll let me know. Oh, here's another receivable. Okay. And, oh, here's a potential customer. I think I'll keep that one. Okay. There's my records, and I keep them right here, right close to me. Okay. Now, I don't know about you. Some other people have to keep file cabinets full of records. If you're in the insurance business or if you're a doctor and you have to keep medical records and things like that, okay, just be aware of the fact that those records can be subpoenaed into court. And if for some reason there's something on those records that could be incriminating to you in some way, anything that you write down can be used against you. Okay? Keep that in mind. Whether you say it or whether you write it down, in some cases it can be used against you. So what I would suggest is don't make any incriminating statements and don't keep incriminating records. I mean, I'm not going to keep records around of my marijuana transactions. Do you think I'm going to go buy marijuana on my MasterCard and then keep the receipts and use them? What for? Is your marijuana purchase tax deductible? Well, not unless you've got what do they call those from a doctor? A prescription from a doctor. Now, if you've got a prescription from a doctor, then it could be deductible. I don't know. All I'm saying is my common sense tells me, and almost all the cases you read about in the last 10 or 15 years for search and seizure and Fifth Amendment are drug cases. You know, drugs today have simply taken the space of the Volstead Act in our state-run government institution of law enforcement growth industry. You know, we had to have some kind of crime to fight, so we outlawed alcohol, and then we could fight crime for 10 or 15 years. And then the people got tired of fighting alcohol crime, so now the people want to fight drug crime. Well, really no big difference. What you're witnessing today is exactly what our grandfathers were witnessing in the 1920s. Now, the next item here, number 14, use your declaration of rights with all of your correspondence and at every encounter with a public official. A declaration of rights is your statement that you're a free man, and it goes something like this. I usually try to tell people or write into my correspondence, I demand all of my rights at all times, and I waive none of my rights at any time for any cause or reason, including my right to time. In other words, now the Supreme Court, when they look at your case, they don't have to wonder if there's any rights involved. You've declared your rights. I demand all of my rights, and I don't waive any of them. That's a pretty plain statement. Number 15, demand all of your rights at the beginning of every hearing. So when I go into the courtroom, one of the first things that I say, if I'm challenging jurisdiction, I'd say, well, I'm here under threat, duress, and coercion. I'm not voluntarily appearing before this court, but I understand that I'll be arrested if I don't. So this is my good faith appearance and my good faith challenge to the jurisdiction of the court. And in addition to that, I demand all of my rights at all times and waive none of my rights at any time for any cause or reason. Okay? What that does is set the record out so that when the case gets to Judge Berger in Washington, he doesn't have to sit there and read for hours and find out whether you had any rights that needed to be protected. Number 16, always demand counsel of your choice who is not a licensed lawyer or member of the bar. I'm not against licensed lawyers, and there are times when I use a licensed lawyer. What I'm suggesting is that when a licensed lawyer goes in, remember the belligerent claimant doctrine, it cannot be claimed by an attorney or solicitor, and when a lawyer goes in, jurisdiction is automatically conferred because when he walks in, he's put in as the attorney of record, isn't he? And you become an incompetent. He has your power of attorney, so here you are an incompetent. Your power of attorney is granted in this lawyer, and this lawyer then is acceding to and granting jurisdiction to the court, so you've lost jurisdiction, and you can no longer defend yourself. And when you lean over and tell your lawyer to do thus and such, she'll say, sit down, shut up, dummy. I know what's good for you. Isn't that the way the doctors treat you? Sit down, shut up. This thalidomide is good for you. Just take this thalidomide here. We know what's good for the body. Okay, well, what I'm saying is that I'm competent to handle my own case. In any event, I can't do any worse than a lawyer. If you've got a public defender over there, why don't you ask your public defender how many cases he's won? I asked one of those public defenders that one time, and he'd been in the public defender's office for 5 years, and he'd handled hundreds of cases in that 5 years in San Francisco. And I said, how many cases did you win? None. Not a one. Out of hundreds of cases, all he ever did was make sure that the fellow went to prison without his rights being violated so that the court could put him away. That's all he was there for, was to guide him down the right channels and chute so that he could go to jail, so that he wouldn't have any appealable issues with which to come back against the court on a writ of habeas corpus and claim his rights because of the grand jury issue or the information issue or the public prosecutor, prosecuting attorney type issues and constitutional grounds. So that lawyer will make absolutely sure you have no constitutional rights to come back against the court to demand rights at law when they put you in the prison for civil violations. So my observation is you can't possibly do any worse. We had a doctor here who was a naturopath charged with 22 offenses in Ada County, and he spent $28,000, as I understand it, or $20,000. It was quite a chunk of money on a private lawyer. When he ran out of money, his private lawyer dumped him, so he got a public persecutor. The public persecutor guided him right into prison, and when the jury came back, they found him guilty on all 22 counts. Let me ask you a question. If you were charged with 22 counts, and you had no lawyer at all, and you went in and you absolutely stood mute and never said a word, could you do any worse than that? I don't see how. You could only be found guilty for the 22 charges, and it looks like to me he would have saved $20,000 or $25,000. Now here's a guy who paid $25,000 to go to prison. I don't see any need to do that. So, if you're a lawyer out there, I'm not trying to screw up your business in any way. I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm just claiming my Sixth Amendment right to counsel of my choice. And my observation is that Judge Berger was pretty well correct when he said 90% of the trial lawyers in this country were incompetent. Somebody said no, he said 50% or 40%. I don't know what he said. I just agree with him. I think it's right. Whatever the percentage is, and from my own experience, this is my own observation. I don't know what the percentage is, but if Judge Berger said that it was less than 90%, Judge Berger does err. Because I've been around, and let me tell you, 90% of the lawyers in Ada County are incompetent. Okay? And I can tell you that from my own personal experience, but I can't say what's true out in Iowa or Illinois or some other place. All right, when we're talking about number 16, then, that licensed lawyer, remember, is a member of the bar. He is a member of a very powerful labor organization. They're called unions when blue-collar workers belong to them. When lawyers belong to a union, they call it the Bar Association. Okay? Now, you're a scab. You're going in the court and you're demanding your rights. Now, here you are, a scab operating in there, and the judge belongs to the bar, the prosecutor belongs to the bar, the public persecutor belongs to the bar, and your private lawyers all belong to the bar. And you're a scab. Let me see now. Let's see how that works. Let's go out on the docks, okay? And here you've got some union out here on the docks. What do they call that union on the docks? I don't know, some maritime union, and they're kind of mean, nasty guys. And you're a scab, and you go out there and you want to work. Do you think that you're going to be received very well out there unloading the ship, and you don't belong to the union? Well, that's why you're not received very nicely when you enter a courtroom, because you see, that courtroom belongs to that bar association. You have an inalienable right to go in there, but of course these unionists don't necessarily want to have their money monopoly disturbed by some scab, some dumb citizen coming in there demanding rights. Number 17, always force the government into common law jurisdiction, because you see, when you're in civil law, you can't win. When you're at common law, you can't lose. Now, of course, if you're guilty of a common law crime like rape, robbery, arson, or murder, or something like that, you're going to be tried in a common law jurisdiction. You're going to get a 12-man jury. You're going to get some trappings of the common law. If you're in Idaho, of course, you won't get a grand jury indictment or an executive officer to prosecute you, and they'll violate your rights in a number of other ways. But they'll give you some common law trappings, or at least they'll give you some phony common law trappings. So it's up to you to force the government then into common law jurisdiction. And what we have in Idaho is trial by government, not trial by the people. Now, I don't know when or how that came about. It's probably been in the last 20 or 25 years. I understand in California they're still using some grand juries. And the federal courts use grand juries for indictments. Whether they're using them correctly or not, I'm not really sure, because I haven't seen any. And I'm not sure that I'd know how to handle a grand jury if I was brought in on one. But it's about time we began to learn how our grand juries worked again, and let's bring that back. One of the biggest complaints that our founding fathers had was that King George was taking our people across the seas, trying them in foreign and alien jurisdiction, denying them right by jury. When you're given an admiralty jury of 6 people who can only try the issues of fact and not the issues of law, you don't have a common law jury. So it's necessary for you, and this lawyer, remember, isn't going to go in there and compel them into a common law jurisdiction. If any common law jurisdiction is going to be compelled, it's going to be compelled by your demand because you're the belligerent claimant in person. In failure of you to be the belligerent claimant in person, remember, your lawyer represents clients. Only you can demand rights. Lawyers do not claim or demand rights. Number 18, you must establish jurisdiction in all matters and never let it go. Okay, the examples of jurisdiction, they cover law, geography, crime, equity, time, and the Constitution. So what you're talking about here is the jurisdiction issue, and the jurisdiction issue covers the geography, it covers in personam, it covers in rem. You know, jurisdiction over the right subject matter in rem, jurisdiction over the right person, that's personal jurisdiction, jurisdiction over the geography. And remember that the Constitution comes into play also, and that's a constitutional jurisdiction. And you may need a writ of prohibition to prevent an admiralty court from trying you when you're really a common law citizen. So a writ of prohibition under Article 3, Section 2 would go to the Supreme Court of the United States. All right, number 19, never plead in a criminal case. Okay, when you're in a criminal case, you don't plead because to plead grants jurisdiction to the court. It works like this. You walk into the court and the judge says, well, how do you plead? Well, I plead not guilty. Well, what you're saying is I grant you jurisdiction and I'm going to let you try the case and you're a good judge and you can sit there and everything's honky-dory and just fine and I'm not guilty and so therefore I'm going to show you that I didn't do this act. If you walk in and plead guilty, well, then you're granting jurisdiction to the court and saying, yes, I'm guilty, I did the act and I admit it and I understand the willfulness of it. Therefore, you should put me in prison and I'll throw myself on the mercy of the court and you just punish me any way you want. I'm Toby the slave. Or you can plead nolo contendere in some jurisdictions, which means that I'm going to keep my rights. I'm not going to waive my rights, but I'm not going to contest the issue. Go ahead and find me. And you can plead double jeopardy. Now, double jeopardy means that you've been tried for the same offense. That's a very rare type of plea. It would appear to be correct in some limited cases, but it's very, very seldom they'll ever try you twice. And then you can stand mute. And so, in a criminal case, you should challenge jurisdiction and stand mute. And to illustrate that, there was a federal judge charged with bribery or taking bribes of some kind, and I noticed that he stood mute. Now, does that tell you something? If a federal judge charged with a crime stands mute, that tells me that he knows something and that maybe I ought to do the same thing. All right, number 19 is never plead in a criminal case. Number 20, never use a licensed lawyer to represent you. The reason for that is very simple. If he represents you, you become incompetent. It grants jurisdiction to the court. Now you're acceding to the jurisdiction of the old Roman civil law. And that comes from the Tower of Babel and Nimrod and all of these ancient, old-time pagan religions and pagan governments have been using the civil law and the law merchant and the law of the sea for thousands of years. The common law comes from Mount Sinai. The common law is bound up in labor, gold, silver, that's precious metals in the land. And only the Israelites had private land and private ownership of land. You won't find very many examples. If you do, if you know of some examples of free men exercising rights at law in a common law jurisdiction, that is ownership of land and ownership of property to the exclusion of all others in the universe, let me know. Because only in the Bible and only the Israelites, when they crossed the Jordan River for a limited period of time, do I ever see that until we came to the United States and reestablished the right of the sovereign. The citizen is sovereign in the United States. Under the judges in Scripture, there was no king in Israel in those days, and that jurisdiction or that nation of people had judges, but no king, no taxation, no property tax. And there were no institutions to own the land. The citizens owned the land, and they had gold and silver because they just robbed the Egyptians, remember? That was a unique system of government, and it was repeated in the United States after our Constitution was formed, and of course pursuant to the Coinage Act of 1792 when we went to hard money. Today we've gone back to the civil law. In other words, it's kind of like in the time of guess it was Samuel the judge, and the people said, hey, we've got to have a king like all the rest of the nations around us. And that's about what we did in 1913. We said, gosh, we got to have an economic system like all the rest of the nations. We got to have money. And since that time, this paper money has now drowned our common law because now there's no substance to the common law. Now, when we're saying here, never use a licensed lawyer to represent you, what you're doing is you're granting that jurisdiction in the civil case. And as I've said before, I don't think that you could do any worse. Number 21, never use a public defender to represent you, and that's pretty well self-evident. I've never heard of a public defender who ever won a case. Now, there may be some out there. Maybe a public defender one time in 1,000 will win a case. But I can tell you of a lot of pro se's and citizens who have won cases. I don't know of any public defenders who have ever won a case. That's not even their business or their job. They're just there to protect your rights. Number 22, never use the IRS tax court. When you go into the IRS tax court, you have to petition your way in there. So here you are petitioning Caesar to listen to your case. That's the last guy in the world you want to petition. That's an administrative court. There's no juries involved. You can't be compelled in there. You have to volunteer. You have to petition the tax court to get into it. Or any administrative executive hearing at any time for any reason. And when you go to these administrative executive hearings, what you're in effect doing is you're petitioning the master, and you're going to prove that you're innocent. You should not be a person who's required to go into those types of hearings. If you are, if you're a person who's subject to the tax. And we had a case not long ago, a fella had filed his tax returns, and he had all the documentation and everything, and they called him into a hearing, and then he started raising the Fifth Amendment and just jumping up and down, and I don't see any logic or reason to that. In the event that you've been filing tax returns, etc., you owe the tax because you filed the return, didn't you? Unless there's some mistake of fact, well then you're telling them, yeah, I'm a taxpayer, I owe the tax, and you file the return, and then a couple, 3 years later they say, okay, we're going to audit you, and then you throw their letters in the waste paper basket, you claim Fifth Amendment rights and privileges. You're just in total contradiction of the Hale Doctrine, and then they disallow all of your deductions. And then they claim that you owe them $30,000, and then they go to put a lien on your farm because you owed them the $30,000. I don't see any rhyme or reason to that. I'm assuming that if you filed the tax, you didn't lie, you didn't steal, you didn't cheat. You filed the return, you paid the tax due 3 years ago. Why don't you just go in there with the books and the records and the papers and document it and lay it out in spades and say, there it is, I don't owe you anymore. If you want to get out of the tax system, that's fine, you should get out of it. But if you're in the tax system, got to lay this on you again. Good old Hale, if you're in the tax system, I just don't understand people that then want to claim the Fifth Amendment. We're of the opinion that there is a clear distinction in this particular between an individual and a corporation, and that the corporation has no right to refuse to submit its books and papers for an examination at the suit of the state. So what you've done is you've volunteered into the jurisdiction of the state, and then after you volunteered into the jurisdiction of the state, then you're not going to show them your books and records. I know I used to do that. Here I was a corporation, and I threw the ocean inspector out in the street. I'm a corporation here, and so I throw the EPA inspector out in the street. Now that I understand, I say I thought I had rights, and there were no rights involved in that, and so there was no reason for me to throw OSHA out in the street. What I needed to do was to disincorporate, and then I wouldn't have a corporation, and then the state wouldn't have any claim on me and on my rights, and I could assert my rights and tell the ocean inspector, no, you can't come in. So, here again, you don't want to use these administrative procedures if you're a free man. To volunteer into those administrative procedures is to grant them jurisdiction, and they're going to put liens and things on your property. And when we get into the special tax lesson, I'll show you how that goes in more detail. But for this moment in time, all I want to do is tell you what you should or shouldn't do, and then whether or not you want to do it or not is up to you. If you feel that you have to have bank credit cards, well, then you ought to be aware of the limitations that are involved. And when I was in that corporation, I just needed to be aware of the limitations that were involved. If anybody would have ever said, okay, Gordon, you don't have any constitutional rights, I think I could have understood that. Now, number 23, never fail to appear at any hearing at any time or answer any correspondence with your declaration of rights for any reason. Well, here's what happens. You know, you get a letter from the tax guy, and you wad it up and you throw it away and you ignore it. Well, if you get a bill from somebody and you owe the guy $200 and he sends you a bill for $600, don't you get him on the phone and say, hey, Sam, you made a mistake on this bill? Well, when the IRS or some agency of government calls me up, you know, I get them right on the phone. I got this notice, and I just got the guy right. Oh, gee, hi, Bill. Hey, I got a letter here. It says you want me to file tax return, and I just thought I'd call and tell you I don't have any income, and I don't understand why you want me to file. Well, I think we ought to sit down and talk this over, don't you? See, just get them right on the phone. In other words, don't go hide in the corner like a mouse from the cat. Why don't you act like the cat? You know, those public servants up there work for me. I don't have to go hide in the corner from my public servants. You know, I used to be in the business world, and I never allowed any employees to come in, sit down in my chair, put his feet up on my desk, and then interview me. I used to be the guy behind the desk. If anybody's going to put his feet up on the desk, it's going to be me. I'm the owner of the company, remember? I'm the sovereign citizen. You're a bureaucrat. You work for me. Now, let me tell you how this comes down. So I'm not your servant. So I always like to go to those hearings, and you should always answer the correspondence. And you know the hardest thing for people to do is to just tell them, I'm not a taxpayer. I'll lay this little trip on you. Maybe I've mentioned it before, but I went into a tax hearing, and this lady said to me, Mr. Gordon, as a taxpayer, we find that you haven't paid, or you haven't filed your 1040 form. And I said, sweetheart, I'm not a taxpayer. Oh, come now, Mr. Gordon. We're all taxpayers, and all of us have income. How do you buy your groceries from Albertson? Wait a minute, sweetheart. Let me see if I understand it. You telling me that I'm a taxpayer because everyone else out there is a taxpayer? Well, certainly. Oh. Well, then you must be a whore. Boy, did she come unglued. She just sat there and preached me a sermon. She told me that there was no need for me to call her names or to get vile and nasty. And I said, sweetheart, I'm just using the same logic that you're using. You're claiming that I'm a taxpayer because everybody else out there is a taxpayer. I'm just saying that you're a whore because all whores are female and you're a female. And since all whores are female, you must be a whore. Well, now you see, she began to see the logic and, well, oh, I see. Well, you know, maybe for the first time in her life, somebody said, wait a minute. There are probably some females out there that are not whores. And it just could be that there's some people out there that aren't taxpayers. And then I went on to illustrate. I said, you know, there's some people over in Blackfoot, Idaho, that are committed to an institution, and they're called crazy people. Do you audit their tax returns? Over here in Nampa, there's an institution over there with a whole bunch of people that have IQs of 20 and 30 and 40 and incompetent, and they're wards of the state. Are you auditing their tax returns? Are they taxpayers? Oh, they're not. Well, how do you know I'm not crazy or an incompetent? We haven't talked about that. There can be a whole bunch of people out here that aren't taxpayers. Now, I came in here plainly. I told you I'm not a taxpayer. If you will agree not to call me a taxpayer, I'll agree not to call you a whore. Now, once we got that out of the way, we could then continue on with the dialogue. See? It's a very simple thing. So I always go in and talk to these people because, after all, they're slaves and servants of us, the sovereigns, and I like to go in and treat my servants with due respect. And after all, I want those servants out there collecting taxes because that's their job. And when they collect tax, they build roads for me, and I drive up and down on those roads. Number 24, do not own any real or personal property in your own name. Now, a lot of people say, well, I just have to do that. Okay. That's like saying, well, I have to have a bank account and I have to have a credit card and I just can't function unless I have a bank loan to plant my crops. Well, fine. Okay. But remember that your real or personal property are your toys, and if you have toys on the good ship Idaho, don't forget that the captain is the master of the good ship Idaho. So if he comes down and breaks into your stateroom and steals your toys from you by putting a lien on your bank account or a lien on your house or something like that, don't get mad at him. He's just doing his job. Now, I live in a house and it's got a roof on it, and I lived there all winter, and it didn't snow on me, and I didn't get wet, and I don't own the house, and I didn't pay any tax on it. And in addition to that, my government can't put liens on somebody else's property. Okay? I drive a car, but I don't own it. I ride a snowmobile, but I don't own it. I can ride a motorcycle, and I don't own it. I can ride a horse, and I don't own it. I don't own anything. I got this necktie I claim to own, that wristwatch I claim to own, the shirt I claim to own. I have a Bible. I claim to own that. So there are a few little things that I claim to own, but they're all exempt from liens by the IRS because the captain has given me the special permission. I'm entitled to own a television set if it's black and white, and I can have a car if it's not over $500. But I can't have a color television set, and I can't have a house, I can't have any motorcycles, I can't have a second car. All of that stuff is called toys. Those toys can be attached, and they can be seized from me when there is a decision rendered against me by my IRS. Okay? And so, you want to keep that in mind. Now, if you don't own any toys, you're going to be amazed at how unpopular you become with your government. There was a time when I used to own, that's a lie. I never really owned anything, but I claimed and thought I owned a lot of toys, and I had these equitable interests in 3 or 4 pickups, and big trucks and trailers, and sanders, and all kinds of wood processing equipment, and units of lumber, and just all sorts of things, and cars, and houses, and beachfront cabins, and just on and on, because I thought that that's what success in life was. It's ownership and acquisition of toys. And you maybe have heard the old story. The only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. Now, when you're a person who has a lot of toys, the government is real interested in people with lots of toys. When you're a little kid and you had a lot of toys, didn't all the kids in the neighborhood want to come over and play with your toys? I noticed that when I was 5 years old. I used to have these real nifty toys, and boy, did I have a lot of friends. Now, if you don't have toys, you don't have friends. And you're going to find that when you get to be a big boy, that if you don't have any toys, your government just doesn't have any interest in you whatsoever. You can get a judgment against me in the morning for $50 million, and you couldn't collect 35 cents. So it doesn't make any difference whether the judgment's for 35 cents or $35 million. You can't get anything out of me because I'm a deadbeat, and I'm a creep, and I'm unemployed, and what are some of the names? Tax resistor, protester, evader, criminal. My government has all kinds of nasty euphemisms that they hang on me. But they don't lien my bank account, and they don't put liens on my houses, and they don't seize my cars, and they don't take my motorcycles, because they don't have any of those things. And so now they don't even send me letters anymore. I'm so unpopular. There was a time when I used to deal with 28 agencies of government, and there was never a day when I walked into my office that some agent of my government didn't have a letter sitting on my desk demanding to play with some of my toys or demanding some equitable interest in my toys. Now that's how popular I was 5 years ago. And I paid $200,000 a year in taxes and employed 30 people and produced $1 million a year. Today I produce nothing, employ no one, pay no taxes, and I came into my office this morning and not one government agency had written me a letter wanting to play or share with any of my toys. Not a one. Now that's how unpopular I am, and boy do I like it. I'm a very unpopular fellow, and if you want to be unpopular with your government, you just get rid of all your toys. And you're just going to be you'll be like having bubonic plague. And you'll go up to your government agent. I was in there the other day talking with a guy, and I told this girl, you are a wonderful interviewer, and this audit was just conducted, based upon all the rules, and you've just conducted a wonderful interview. Can I have an audit? I'd like to have one. She said, well, did you file? No. Well, you can't have an audit if you don't file. Darn! No wonder you guys don't ever invite me in for an audit. In other words, if I would file a 1040 form, you'd audit my account, wouldn't you? Well, that depends on whether the computer kicked it out. Well, what if I filed and I put a lot of real nasty numbers on there, like high income and higher deductions? Yeah, that would get it kicked out of the computer, and then you'd get an audit. So here's an IRS agent telling me that if you don't file, you don't get an audit. Now, isn't that a shame? So if you want to have an IRS audit, then you're going to have to file 1040 forms. Otherwise, you just can't have one. And so I just want to let you know that if you're going to have fun with the IRS, you're going to have to file 1040 forms. If you don't want to have fun, then just don't file any, and then you'll be left out like I am. All right. Let me just recapitulate in this lesson, and let's see what we covered, because this IRS scam seems to be, one of the more popular issues. IRS and the income tax are probably the easiest things to drop out of, and probably one of the most vexing problems that citizens have. That is, members and subjects have. Citizens don't have problems with the IRS because they don't pay tax. So if you're a member and a subject, and you're interested in this tax, the rules of procedure for tax avoidance, as soon as I get through with this series of lessons here on how to handle yourself, first thing I want to do is teach you how to swim. Once I teach you how to swim, then I'll teach you how to be a swimming star. But while you're in the pool and you're just gasping and struggling to keep your nose above the water, I don't think you should be going into the tax court or going into the district court trying to argue willful failure to file. So if you will follow these rules, then you can get out of the tax system and you won't have that problem. And if you do have tax problems, then you're going to have to bear with us, and we'll give you that special series. It's just like land. I can tell you how to go out and claim 10,000 acres of BLM land, but you're going to have to go into court and defend the trial of title, and if you can't go in and argue a parking ticket or a speeding ticket, how are you going to go in and argue a trial of title in a federal district court claiming 10,000 acres of land? Don't you see? You need to learn how, first of all, to swim, and then after you learn how to swim, then you can do the more advanced things like practice for the Olympics. All right, so in this lesson here, you need these 24 rules of a successful tax avoidance, and you need this IRS secret handbook. Start out here in the middle of the book where you get this gold page, and it's the last half, and there's a number of tax cases in there that you need to get between your ears so that you too will understand what the Supreme Court has said about taxes and about persons required to file and etc. And boy, there's all kinds of search and seizure cases in here too. Show you how to keep your records. Right here. Got them all right there. And what is income and what is compensation? I think that's answered pretty well in here also. The IRS will tell you what compensation is and what income is. Compensation is a trade. It's your labor for money is compensation. But if you put $5,000 in the bank and you get $1,000 interest, that interest is income. So you want to keep that in mind. So I think that'll pretty well cover this lesson 17 on the IRS scam. And wish you a lot of luck with it. If you're having problems with the IRS, well, just bear with us, and it won't be too long until we have a complete lesson on how to handle the IRS and how to drop out of it, and that'll be a special section all of it by itself. So until next time, have fun, and remember our motto is, if you're not having fun at your IRS tax hearing, it's because you're not conducting it correctly.